Welcome back to the channel, and before we get started, I'd like to say thanks to my sponsor, Blade & Beam. They have new gear drops every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central Time, and I always try to do my best to notify y'all on my community threads. Well, today we're going to look at the brand new Tactile Knife Co. Chupacabra. This is one that I want to check out for a good while now. You can get this one in two different variations, either the tumbled blade like I have, or they also come with a satin blade. These are made in the US in their Dallas, Texas shop, and it's a perfect EDC size in my opinion. At 7.73 inches long, it has a 3.3 inch sheet foot blade of CPM Magna Cut steel Rockwell from 63 to 64 HRC. Outstanding. So it should have good edge retention, corrosion resistance, and toughness. Of course, we're going to test that out in a second. This is going to be a highly versatile blade shape. Being that that tip is below the center line of the pivot, it's going to be easy to manipulate it for detailed precision cuts. You have just the right amount of belly to cut on a flat cutting surface, and you don't have any flipper tabs, so you can get that entire edge onto the flat cutting surface, especially being that this portion sits lower than the actual scales, while also making in-hand cuts a breeze as well, because your belly doesn't curve too much. You do have some jimps up here. I call it moderate traction jimping. Not the biggest deal in my opinion on my folders, but you are a jimping person. They're not super grippy, and I do think they could have brought it out a little bit further to make them a little bit more useful. They do have a perfectly executed sharpening choil. You see where my fingernail is right there? You can have all that sharpening light before this heel will start to widen up at all. Love seeing that. Dual thumb studs, we'll talk about that in the action section. You have 0.135 inch blade stock on this one, so pretty beefy with a flat grind, and they still managed to get it down nice and thin to around 18 thousandths behind the edge with a 22 degrees per side edge bevel. Let's see what it can do. The knife came with a pretty good edge out of box. It's not the sharpest knife I've ever gotten, but it's definitely not the dullest, and it's slicing very well. I would assume that it has pretty good edge geometry. We will check that for the actual review. This knife has that perfect amount of belly. It's not too swoopy going to that tip. It's just the right amount to where I can make some fairly long cuts before it's going to end up sliding out of the material. It just depends on what you're cutting. And, you know, like this type of stuff is going to be perfectly fine. And I even did some longer cuts. I don't know if I did them in this actual test footage, but I did some longer cuts, and, you know, it had no issues. I did need to be mindful of the larger sharpening choil. It wasn't a problem once I adjusted for it. Now we're testing the ergos on this piece of pine. We want to also see how that edge is wanting to still bite. It's biting well. And the lighter stuff, it's perfect. The handle fills out the hand nicely. But I will say, once I start really bearing down, putting pretty much all my pressure into the wood, I did start to feel the top of the Superlock. So just something I felt like I needed to say. But my hands are pretty beat up, so you take that with a grain of salt. Now, this is another spot where I kind of started feeling that Superlock. You'll see whenever I transition into the other grip, my index finger is sitting on top of the Superlock. Not the most comfortable, but it was really comfortable doing the pointer finger grip. I just like to try to do as much as I can, or change it up as much as I can. So yeah, it's doing well. It's got enough bite to this edge to where it's fairly easy to cut. And even though I'm not testing for edge retention, I think it would have performed pretty darn well. Now I will probably lay this edge, if I end up purchasing this knife, I will lay this edge bevel back some. It's at, I think, like 22 degrees per side. I'll probably set it to 17 to 18 degrees, and this thing is going to be a slicing machine. I just measured the behind the edge thickness, and it's around 18 thousandths behind the edge with a 22 degrees per side edge bevel. So, you know, it's got the thinness, and with that lower edge bevel, it's gonna be a slicing machine. And man, this knife feels so stout. Like, I feel like I could chop a tree down with this thing. So yeah, very, very nice performance. I really enjoyed this blade shape. I like the upward slant to it, and it performed really well for everything that I cut. So outstanding job. And it's really going to excel at those drag cuts. I mean, a little scalpel up there in the front. And you should be able to make just about any cuts on a flat cutting surface because you got the perfect amount of belly. The tip still sits low, so if you need the tip work, is very easy to do. That's why this is usually my preferred blade shape for versatility and just overall, it just makes things a lot easier. 10-ounce denim, absolutely no issues whatsoever. And yeah, all in all, outstanding job. I absolutely loved the way this one performed, and it was comfortable while doing so. That's all I can really ask for. Well, I thought it performed really nicely. If I do decide to purchase this one after this review, I'll probably lay that edge back to about 17, 18 degrees, and it's going to perform even better than before. But let's take a look at the deployment action of this knife. So you have dual thumb studs that work really nicely, and this thing rockets out. And that's pretty impressive because this knife has the Snex Super Lock, and like on this Vision R, it doesn't really have a detent per se, and it's not, the action's good, but it's not great because of the lack of a detent. I mean, it does suck it in, but Tactile managed to beef up the locking system, and I don't really know how they did it. I'm sure it's a notch in the blade, but just listen. You actually have a detent per se. Listen to this. And it does an outstanding job of loading that blade up. It is riding on bearing, so it is nice and smooth. If you want to, you can deploy it with the Super Lock as well. Just pull it back. And thanks to my buddy Jared and Eve's Knives, they made this jimping sharper on the Super Lock so you can have a better purchase on it. And I have no problems. I have not slipped off of it once. And being that we have the Super Lock, it's a completely ambidextrous lock, and you have those thumb studs on the opposite side so you can actuate that blade. However, I do think they missed an opportunity by making this reversible. I don't know if they make lefty versions of this or not. If not, they did miss out a little bit on that part of the market. Now let's touch on the ergos on this knife. So during all the cutting, for the most part, it was really comfortable. There's two areas where I'd noticed some discomfort. Whenever I was doing the pinch grip cuts like this or like this, doing the rope cutting, that rope requires you to push down pretty hard, and the top of this Super Lock can get pretty uncomfortable after a while. I could adjust my grip back, but when you're further back, your leverage point's further back, so you can't get as much pressure down. So I always come up on the blade. Now I can put my finger up here, and I'm kind of pushing myself away. So that's how I try to do it as much as possible. And then whenever I got to the wood carving where I'm testing the ergos, you know, for light duty stuff, it was very comfortable. But you can see right here where my grip is in the hammer grip. And once again, if you grip back some behind it, you're not going to have a whole lot of power up here because your leverage point is pushed back. Closer you are to that blade, the more solid your grip, and that blade's not going to want to push back on you. So it was comfortable all the way to the very end, but I will say at the very end, I'm pushing as hard as I can into the wood, and this portion became pretty uncomfortable. But other than that, you know, the stuff I'd mainly be using this knife for, day-to-day EDC tasks, I think it's going to be perfectly fine. And you got to remember that my hands are much more beat up than the average person, so take it with a grain of salt. I do like the thickness on these scales. They fill out my hand nicely, and the width as well. Other than this spot, I had no issues, no sharp spots, nothing poking or prodding me. They did a good job. They got nice chamfers going all the way around, and there's no severe spots that my grip felt during any of the cutting besides the top of this Super Lock. Now let's take a look at the handle area. You have aluminum scales over hardened stainless steel liners. I forget what steel the liners are, but they are hardened to 50 HRC. And you have these large barrel spacers this souped up Super Lock. They were definitely making this a heavy user. I think they did a great job of that. The lock bar is a hardened piece of AEBL steel from I think it's like 60 to 62 HRC on this. So excellent job. It definitely feels like a tank. Your hardware, you have a Torx T8 for your pivot and all your body screws as well. They did a great job making everything T8. Love seeing that. I don't have to swap out drivers or anything. You have a tip up deep carry pocket clip, and it sits fairly deep in the pocket. You have enough ramp and enough spring that it goes in and out of the pocket nicely. Now, your clip is inset into the aluminum. Your screws aren't countersunk. However, as you can see there, they're rounded over like mushroom head screws. I had no issues with my lightweight shorts getting hung up on these screws being that they're not countersunk, but I did have a pair of jeans whenever I was sliding it into the pocket that it was getting bunched up right before there because you have less space because of that. So if you had thicker seams on your jeans, then it may not go in as easy, or it may not go all the way down. It holds it in there nicely. And like I said, this is a very stout knife. It's coming in at 134.4 grams or 4.74 ounces. So I don't mind that at all. I like the extra heft, especially when it's a beefier knife, and I definitely don't think that's too heavy. Take a look at the inside. They did do some lightning pockets on the top and bottom liner, but you do have to remember you do have this pretty chunky stock of AEBL right here for your Super Lock, and then you have some pretty chunky blade stock there, along with aluminum scales over stainless steel liners. That's giving you your extra weight. Now, when it comes to the lock on this thing, up and down, I can kind of make it wiggle a little bit, but that's to be expected. And there's when I say no side to side whatsoever, I can't even flex it. And I plan on purchasing this one if I can afford it at the time after this review. And if I do purchase it, I'll test the lock out. But I didn't want to do that just in case I can't afford to keep it after the review. Now for some size comparisons. We got the Ontario Rat 1 and 2. It's in the middle of those. And next, it's smaller than the Spyderco PM2. However, it has about the same amount of cutting edge to it. And it's bigger than the Power 3. Here it is next to the Tactile Maverick and the Tactile Rockwall. And lastly, it's smaller than the WE Vision R. And it's almost identical in length to the Benchmade 940. All right, now for my nitpicks and complaints. I'm not sure if they make lefty versions, but being that you have dual thumb studs and you have the Super Lock, I definitely think they didn't need to exclude that portion of the market. But like I said, they may make a lefty version. I'm not too sure. Next, I did have some minor hot spots with the top of the Super Lock. But like I said in the video, you know, for the day-to-day EDC tasks that I use this for, it's going to be fine. And if I have to do some heavier cutting, it's going to be fine for a good while, especially if I put on gloves. And, you know, I think if you could put jimping, make it a little bit grippier and come out a little bit further. And I know some people griped about the price. It's expensive, I know that. But I definitely don't think it's out of line. And let me explain why. This is a USA made knife, proper HRC. They heat treated all the components like the stainless steel liners and this lock to make it a stronger knife. These come in at $249. So let's compare some prices. The brand new Benchmade 940 with the burnt orange aluminum scales and MagnaCut blade is $270. The mini 940, I think it's a 945, same setup, $260. So even the mini is more expensive than the Chupacabra. Go to the ZTO 545, that super thin ZT that they released this year. That one comes in at $272. I guarantee you none of those that I just talked about have the HRC to where this one does, where you're going to get way better performance out of that edge and still have good corrosion resistance and toughness. One, in my opinion, that is definitely comparable. It's probably a little bit stronger than this one, but this one is a very beefy knife. Would be the new Cold Steel Recon M1. That one has the MagnaCut with the Triad lock and the G10 scales. That one's more expensive at $260, and I'm pretty sure that one's not made in the US. Now, you can look at the Kershaw Bel Air for $150, but it's nowhere near the caliber of this one. Just being honest, they're both made in the US, but this one is a far superior knife. I have the Bel Air. It's a great knife at its price point. But if you're looking for a premium, heavier user, I think it's a good looking blade. It has a very versatile blade shape. It's nice and slicey. You got nice and smooth action. And I love that sound it makes whenever it breaks that, however they did that detent, and good action. So my final thoughts, Do I recommend the knife? Yeah, I can definitely recommend it. I can see the value in it. You know, I know it's going to be out of some people's price range, and that's okay. With it, I have tons of videos on knives that are probably in your price range. I got them from the cheapest they come to, you know, a little bit more premium knives. I think Tactile is progressing with every knife that they make. I have another Tactile that should be coming soon. I'm very, very excited about it, and I'll explain all that whenever that one comes in. If you're interested in this knife, I'll have it linked down in the description with the sponsors of the video, Blade and Beam. It will be an affiliate link, so if you want to help support what I do here on this channel, it helps me pay for my testing materials. That is awesome. If not, no big deal. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave those down below, and I'll do my best to get back with you. I hope every one of y'all is having an absolute amazing day. I will see y'all on the next one. Peace. Sa.